of years, I feel like I've been struggling with a lot of burnout. And for a while, I was trying to force it, and I could tell that that wasn't working and it didn't feel good. So then, my cat's feeder just went off. So then I figured I should try a different approach, which was to give myself patience and not force it. And I took that time, and I think I needed that time, but it still didn't feel good. I had become so hyperfixated on showing up perfectly that I stopped showing up at all because I couldn't show up perfectly. And I had set that really unrealistic standard for myself, feeling like in order to present myself or the things that I do, that it needed to be, God damn it, that it needed to fit this made up standard in my mind of what's good enough, of what's enjoyable enough, of what's worth watching. And that right there is the problem in itself. I was thinking so much about what's worth watching more than what's worth creating. That type of thinking just created such a huge barrier for me to feel like I needed to push past. And I had done it before, which is, I think, the most frustrating part. When I first started creating content, I had to really work through imposter syndrome and reminding myself like that I don't care what people think. I don't care how people perceive it, because like I felt good about what I was doing. And because I've grown over the years, obviously my content has grown over the years. To a certain extent, I put myself in this made up box of what I felt like I was allowed to create and what it is that I felt like people wanted to see. And while I love fitness and while it's a really important part of my life and I love being able to share it, I started to feel like all of my content needed to revolve around it, specifically from like a business standpoint. And it kind of stripped the creativity away from it. It started to feel like a job, which obviously it is, and I'm grateful for that. But I was looking for a different feeling of like passion and joy and creativity and motivation. And I kept telling myself that it just needed to be discipline, and that wasn't working. I have always known that I'm creating my own reality, and that used to be something that made me feel really powerful. And then I kind of got in a rut where that made me feel stuck, and it made me feel shame because I didn't know what to do or where to go or how to get there. And I was living so much of my life like in the future, thinking about all the things that I didn't have yet or that I want to have. And while it's good to have goals and ambitions, it took me completely out of the present. And it became really hard to feel grateful for what I've already created and the people I've already impacted and the things I've already done. And once you're in that loop, it's hard to get out, right? I'm sure we've all been there. But to a certain extent, I've come to realize that while it felt so miserable to be in it, part of me clearly wanted to stay in it. Because while it's painful, it's easier for my ego to convince myself that it's out of my control, or that things just keep happening to me, that keep putting up barriers and roadblocks and things just aren't working out for me. And I had to own up to that. I had to take accountability for the fact that that perspective was a choice. And that's okay. That's part of the human experience. But I had to admit to myself that part of me wanted to stay there because it was familiar and it was comfortable, and in the moment it felt easier, even though it was making my long term harder. Somebody asked me what my main barrier was when it comes to creating content, because it is important to me and I've always been really open about that, but I felt stuck for a really long time. There's a huge list of things, right? Some of them are physical barriers, environmental barriers, but a lot of it is mental and emotional barriers. And I just kept saying things like, I don't know, I don't do that much. I wake up, I eat, I work out. When I'm done working out, I come home and I might work some more if I need to, and then I might go on a walk. Um, I might read with my partner. We make dinner, and then we watch something or I play video games. I live a very normal life. I just kept convincing myself that it wasn't entertaining enough, or it wasn't um, aesthetically pleasing enough to film, to it wasn't pleasing enough for people to care to watch. And they asked me what I wanted people to feel when they see my content. And one of the things I said was like, I want people to feel empowered. I want them to watch something and learn something and know that like they can make it happen for themselves. I want them to see it and walk away feeling like a slightly different version of themselves. It reminded me that the whole thing that makes that doable is by showing you guys the reality, which is imperfect. There are weeks I go to the gym once a week when I wanted to go 4 times. There are days I go on walks, there are days I don't. There are days I journal and read and meditate, and there are days I don't. There are days I meal prep, there are days that I make all my meals perfectly, there are days I follow all my macros to a T, and there are days that I don't. And I started to just convince myself that if I can't show up perfectly, it's not worth showing up at all. That kind of defeated my whole purpose. I had this buildup of energy of wanting to be heard and wanting to be seen and knowing that I had valuable things to say, but convincing myself that it wasn't worth it, or that it's really not that important or valuable. And then I started to equate my worth with my productivity and how much I was creating. And that just made things harder for myself. One of my goals for 2025 was to be more vulnerable. And that's what I'm trying to do. Is showing you guys that I live a very normal, imperfect life. And that's what makes it good. That's what makes it relatable. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to be able to get my message across, which is that with a very normal, mundane, sometimes boring and not very aesthetically pleasing life, I can still get to the places I want to get, and you can too. That it's not about showing up perfectly every single day. It's about trying again and again when you fall off. It's about being realistic with yourself about what you can do in that time and knowing that you're trying your best. And a lot of it really comes down to being critically honest with yourself about what is serving you and what's not, and how many of your decisions every day are made with intention. How many of them are unconscious? How many of them do you just make because, well, that's what you've always done? But if you want to live a life that's different than the one you have now, you're going to have to show up differently. And that is something that I preach, and that is something that I believe, and yet I was struggling to apply it to myself, which is another part of why I felt like I can't show up like this. But that's not real life. That's not realistic. Showing you guys that I'm human and showing you guys that I struggle and showing you guys that I'm imperfect is ideally what's going to motivate you guys to be able to show up imperfectly in your own life. And it doesn't matter that it's imperfect because you're still showing up. I had to be really critically honest with myself about my habits and what was serving me and what was holding me back. And almost everything that I came up with were things that were in my control. And that was hard to swallow. That was hard to look at. It felt shameful, it felt embarrassing, and it felt not great. The more you make the decisions that align with the kind of person you want to be and the kind of life you want to live, the closer you get to it. It's in your hands. It's a choice. And it's okay if you're not ready to make that choice, but you still have to accept the fact that it is. This, for me, is a step in the right direction of showing up authentically and showing up vulnerably and just being real. And to quit pretending as if showing up perfectly is what's motivating. If anything, it might be discouraging. And that's the journey that I had to go through, is I would see all this content of people who seem to show up every single day and have that extreme discipline in areas where I might not. It doesn't mean I can't build it, but I also had to be real with myself about whether or not I believed that that was actually beneficial, or if I just wanted it to be something that I could show people I could do. My new goal isn't perfection, it's balance, and it's showing up as I am. I've come to realize that what makes good content isn't about doing something crazy or exciting every day and getting it on camera. It's about making your everyday exciting by simply getting it on camera. I still have a lot of work to do, but I hope to show you guys that process, all the good and the bad, because that's real.